It is now fairly apparent that seminars and conferences are largely off for this year, so I won't be editing anything to appear here. I thought, as an alternative, I could do a few of these short 10-minute pieces about whatever is on my mind. And today, that is rabbit holes. A rabbit hole is a tangential line of reasoning that leads you to a piece of evidence or literature that seems unrelated to the original question. And they are really common in historical research. Why? Well, I think the answer is fairly simple. It's about what historians collectively consider a legitimate answer to a question. In some fields, medical sciences are like this, just publishing a piece of data would be considered enough in its own right to justify a paper. That does happen in history, but it's rare. Usually a historian is expected not just to publish the data, but to explain why and how that data came to be, to give it a context. To take a piece of data related to the example I will talk about in a moment, did you know that 2 2nd century BC silver coins minted in the reign of the same king of Pakistan have been found in Wales? The first one was found in Tenby. in 1878 and is quite famous. The second one was found in Denbighshire last year. That is a very odd piece of data, but most historians accept that that's weird, doesn't justify a publication. To do that, you'd have to be able to say how those coins got there and why that process is historically interesting. To use some technical language, it's the difference between establishing a paradigm and simply exploring one. But I'm not going to talk about the structure of scientific revolutions today. Instead, I'm going to give an example of the sort of rabbit holes trying to explain those 2 coins leads you into. And they start with obvious questions. Are these the only ancient coins from Pakistan found in the UK? How did those other coins get here? The answers are no, and it's complicated. You see, I know about the 2019 find because I was asked to confirm the identification for the Portable Antiquity Scheme when it turned up. The Portable Antiquity Scheme, or PAS for short, is a voluntary scheme in the UK for the reporting of small archaeological finds by members of the public. It doesn't matter whether those are found by somebody digging in their back garden or by a regular metal detectorist. The finds are reported to the local finds liaison officer, who identifies them and then records and photographs the object for the database. And the PAS has been collecting data on finds for decades. Nothing like it exists anywhere else in the world, and the effect it has had on the study of Roman numismatics in particular is really hard to underestimate. In 2015, Caitlin Green wrote a blog post about the finds of ancient Indian and Central Asian coins reported to the PAS. It's a good post, and I'll link to it in the description below. That post included the find from Tenby, and she counted 23 coins in total. Green wondered if they might have arrived here through trade in antiquity. How plausible is that? The alternative explanation, the one that you will see repeated in the database, is that these coins were lost in the 19th or early 20th century when a lot of people from England and Wales travelled to and from India as a result of the East India Company's activities, and you can see where the rabbit hole starts. In order to understand if the ancient coins arrived with 19th century travellers, we need to look at finds of early modern coins. If those travellers mislaid both ancient and contemporary coins, they would have similar patterns of losses. However, when I tried to do that, it immediately raised a new problem. In the database, amongst more recent coins, the most common type were not issued by the East India Company in the 19th century, only 13 of those. They were apparently issued by its Dutch equivalent in the 18th century, 31 the database claimed, and the coins in question were used in Java, not India. These coins are quite distinctive. On one side are the entwined letters VOC, the mark of the Dutch Trading Company. On the other, there is a coat of arms corresponding with the Dutch province or city which minted them. The company had first imported ordinary Dutch small change in 1724 because due to local demand and copper prices it could be exchanged at a profit. From 1727 onwards, it imported enormous quantities and was therefore able to place large orders and get coins struck especially for its purposes with its own mark. And that would make these very well-travelled coins indeed, all the way to Java and back. And it would also make them economically rather odd objects. The Dutch led Europe in financial institutions, and by 1720 they had an effective system of bills of exchange. Why would anyone returning to Europe bring coins with them rather than getting a bill of exchange in order to draw European currency on their return? The coins would make a loss for the same reason that they made a profit when they moved east, whereas a bill of exchange would actually make a small profit due to the length of the journey. It acted as a loan to the company, and so the company could afford to pay interest on it. The answers to those questions required me to look at a lot more Dutch coins. I have now looked at approximately 100 examples of Dutch copper duits on the database, and it turns out most of the supposedly VOC coins are misrecorded. They are in fact just ordinary Dutch small change of the 18th century, which has been mistaken for VOC coins as they have the same coat of arms. Remember, the same mints make both Dutch local copper coinage and the VOC's export coinage. Only about 9 actually have the VOC mark on them, and I don't think they ever went anywhere near Java. In the 18th century, there was a huge shortage of small change in England. A lot of that shortage was met by issuing private tokens, but some of it was clearly met by importing Dutch copper coins, and it seems that happened to include some coins stamped VOC, but never actually shipped to the company's holdings. Having pursued that rabbit hole, I was able to discard the Dutch coins and focus on issues by the colonial powers in India and the various princely or native states, and those turned out to be relatively common and have a fairly distinctive pattern. As the map shows, they reflect travellers landing primarily at the ports of London and Hull. A warning is in order, this data is still a little bit suspect. 19th century Indian coins are a nightmare to identify, and mistakes in the database are pretty common. I have not had a chance to check most of these. The standard catalogue is Kraus, and I do not have a copy at home, nor have I had a chance to look at the substantial number of coins marked simply probably India. That is a rabbit hole for another day. On the way back, to look at the finds of ancient Indian coins in England and Wales, I did find myself pursuing one additional rabbit hole. In her blog post, Green cast some doubt on the idea that collectors would lose ancient coins so readily. It's important in evaluating her rhetorical question to understand that we are not really talking about collectors. Collectors who actively sought out Indian coins for their historical value did take good care of them. Those coins are by and large in museums today, tens of thousands of them from the 19th and early 20th century. What we are talking about are people who casually acquired these objects as curiosities or mementos, more akin to tourist tat than to historical collections. Could these people have been so careless? And the problem is that the losses of early modern Indian coins don't help us. We don't know how much people were bringing back, so we do not know what proportion of it was lost, and even if we did, it's akin to dropping your holiday money, so not really comparable. What we need is something that its owner might be attached to, but not as attached to as a collector, and for which we can estimate the proportion of owners who dropped it. And amazingly, the PAS database does indeed contain 2 such objects. These are campaign badges awarded to soldiers who fought on the 29th of December 1843 at the twin battles of Puniar and Maharajpur. Every soldier who participated and a small number of wives accidentally caught up in the events received one. To illustrate the degree to which colonial violence and colonial scholarship are entwined, Alexander Cunningham, then an engineer, would subsequently become the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India and fought at one of these battles. Most of the combatants, however, were native Indians, as was always the case in British conflicts in India. How many were British combatants? I'm still not entirely sure. The 39th, 40th and 50th regiments certainly took part, but regiments are administrative units, not battlefield ones, and it leaves the question of how many actual troops were present. So, for example, the 39th had an effective strength of 959 a few days later, and fortunately the 19th century regimental history records that. But for the 50th, where the regimental history only records the strength a few years later in the Sikh Wars, the strength recorded there is just 494. I have a few ideas on where else to look for this information, but it will probably have to wait until I can access some specialist libraries. In the meantime, it indicates that losing mementos was not that rare. 1 in 2,000, 1 in 3,000 perhaps. So there is nothing particularly implausible about very commonly collected coins from North India being found in the UK. Having established some background context for Indian coins in the PAS database, it is finally possible to stop pursuing rabbit holes and come back to the original question. Did the ancient Indian coins found in the UK arrive here through trade, in antiquity, or as a result of colonial activity? Here I have mapped the known finds in the UK and divided them into two types. There is a very definite division to be made. The first, marked in brown, are relatively chunky copper coins with a wide variety of weights, but typically 5 to 8 grams, issued from the 1st century BC to the 4th century AD in what today is Pakistan and Afghanistan, mostly by the Kushan Empire. Collections of these are very common. The second group, which the 2 coins of Menander we talked about at the beginning belong to, are Indian standard silver drams, weighing about 2 grams, which were common in the northwest and then on the west coast, as currency from the 2nd century BC to the 6th century AD. All of the finds belong to the first half, with the latest coin being an issue of Nahapana from the 1st century AD. We know these coins circulated at the ports involved in Indian Ocean trade, and at least one has been found in excavation in Egypt. And they immediately show very distinct distributions. The copper, which we can be fairly certain are modern losses, show a definite bias towards the coastal ports, especially London and Hull, like the issues in the colonial period. While the silver, by contrast, are mainly found in a line up the centre of the country. That line up the centre of the country is also the dominant distribution for Flavian period Roman denarii, the kind of coin that might be accompanying them if they did in fact arrive in antiquity. And it is certainly not what we would expect if these had accompanied colonial period travellers. Is it enough to prove all of these coins are ancient losses? No, certainly not enough to prove it. But it strongly suggests that mine and other specialists' scepticism about these coins being lost in antiquity may have been misplaced. And if it nuances our understanding of ancient trade, often dominated by discussions of west to east movements, it definitely justifies pursuing a few rabbit holes.